Om. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Saha Viryam Karavavahe Tejasvinavaditamastu ma Vidvishavahe. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So we left off on, I think we've done 5 and we're on 6. And so the idea of pursuing Tyaga, slowly dropping that fruit of action in your mind and pursuing your goal, your cause, in terms of yajna, dana, tapa, service and sacrifice and gift, and austerity, meaning austerity channelizing your thoughts from being distracted to something higher. So in terms of pursuing Tyaga, it slowly turns one introverted and less focused on the mundane values of the world. Slowly, and slowly that transforms into sannyas. So the dropping of the future fruit, the backdrop of that desire that you have, slowly dissolves itself. But that only comes through knowledge, and when that knowledge is digested, which is then wisdom, and that's practiced. So that transforms one's thinking, understanding, one's state into sannyasa. The sannyasa, the state. So we left off on 6. Let's see. I'm thinking, did
we completed the commentary of 5.
Okay. So let's have the chant of 6.
एतान्यपि तु कर्माणि सङ्गं त्यक्त्वा फलानि च कर्तव्यानीति मे पार्थ निश्चितं मतमुत्तमम्.
Sam, how are you to read the verse?
Unfortunately, my battery from my laptop died, and
that's okay.
Thank you.
Dim, if you could read the verse.
Chapter 18, verse 6. But even these actions should be performed relinquishing attachment and fruit is my firm and highest conviction.
So, in the last verse, in verse 5, he was talking about yajna, dana, tapa. This is the process of gaining tyaga, sannyas, or pursuing tyag to gain sannyas, to gain that state of renunciation, that spiritual evolution. So here he's saying, even these actions, because yajna, dana, and tapaha, all 3 of them, as you pursue them, you could also get attached to these too. So it's almost like a repeat of the verse 5 to 6 here. So even though these are leading you in the direction of a union to your truth, you could get attached to this at any stage too. So in that way, when you're doing it, when you're pursuing any activity in this vein, it's to be aware of that sanga attachment. So any stage, keep your focus off the fruit. The fruit's the future. So even in your discipline, keep your focus off the fruit. Maybe doing your yajna to the best of your ability. You may be offering back as much as you can, but you could get caught in that attachment. So it's keeping an acute discipline or an awareness to keep off the attachment. So you could be serving a particular person for your higher cause, or an organization or an institution. It could be a particular group of people. There's nothing wrong in any of them. In actual fact, that's what we all do in some form or another. But it's when you get attached to, I only serve this. I serve a Vedantic organization, or I serve a Christian organization, or when you get involved and attached to that organization per se, there's the problem. There may be nothing wrong in the organization or the reason or the cause, but it's when you get hooked on that. So the whole idea is that the value is universal, and it's the cause is universal. So the pursuit of tyaga, sanya, renunciation, can't have that attachment in whatever you're doing, material, spiritual, it doesn't make any difference. It's all one and the same, in actual fact. So one never gains the benefit or the peace of mind or the pleasure if one's attached. It really doesn't matter what you're doing. So the minute we expect a result, it's finished. It's not that there ought not to be a result, but it's the focus on the result which kills it. So if you put in one's efforts, hard work, naturally the cause produces an effect. So that's fine, but it's the attachment to it which is not fine. So here he's just emphasizing it again as though we didn't know. We kind of think of real yajna, dana, and tapa is without attachment. It's not yajna, dana, or tapa if it's with attachment. So why repeat it? When you get into yajna, dana, and tapa, when you get into that flow of your activities, somewhere you get stuck. You justify it. So it's to just be aware. Just be alert. So he's mentioning it again, so one doesn't get into it. Or if you're into it, by default you can't help it, then make yourself aware to pull yourself out of it. In the name of good, one gets attached to it. It's not good then. It dissolves itself. It's got a diminishing value. So it's just a reminder. Let's read it.
A spiritual seeker must practice dana, gift, tapaha, austerity, and yajna, sacrifice, without sanga, attachment, and phala, fruit. Attachment arises from bondage with one's past. You bring in your past with all its likes and dislikes into your present action. In effect, action is based on your like. Your desire propels action. In that case, you operate from the mind rather than the intellect. Your action is impulsive. Your intellect must therefore fix an ideal in life. The ideal would determine the course of action, not your mind's attachment to action.
So just to note, you set your ideal, that projects the course of action. But we're not in a tyaga, we're putting forward that the tyaga doesn't focus on the goal. We were mentioning this last week. It focuses on the present action. But no doubt you have a goal, you have an ideal to actually channelize your momentum in that direction, your task in hand. The attachment is a huge topic, which alone, in this verse alone, it doesn't do it justice. It trips you up in every which way. Our likes, dislikes, acting without any goal, wanting to be catered to, impulsive. So the attachment causes the worry and the anxiety. Actually, it's going to say it in the next paragraph. Let's go. Read.
Another impediment to right action is anxiety for acquisition and enjoyment of truth. You crave for success. You're concerned more with the result than the performance of action. Instead, focus your attention on performing right action without concern over the fruit thereof. Krishna finds action as the vital need for Arjuna. He has thus advised Arjuna from the beginning of chapter 3. Here again is Krishna's appeal to act as per the above three disciplines, relinquishing attachment and relinquishing fruit.
So the two things are key to right action: relinquishing attachment and fruit. Frees one up. It's not that one doesn't have a whole lot of likes and dislikes. Our vasanas make us from our past who we are now. You can't avoid that. And it's not that we don't have a goal. You can't avoid that. But the focus is on the present, the task in hand. Performed through yajna, dana, and tapa. So now, and actually it mentions chapter 3, it's actually like a verse taken out of chapter 3. But here now in the second topic, from 7 onwards, it talks about tamasic, rajasic, sattvic tyaga. And if we've recognized it, if we've gone along from chapter 17, tamasic and rajasic are not actually of a real spiritual essence. So the real tyaga is only if it's sattvic. But it's to show them here in the next couple of verses, because it gives us a value of how we misconstrued giving up, relinquishment as a spiritual pursuit, or not a spiritual, as a choice of action, in fact, when it doesn't have any actual validity. So the only one which is of true evolution or tyaga is sattvic renunciation. The rest is like a mockery. So the next verse, verse 7, talks about tamasic renunciation. Tim.
So is this the definition of right action in a succinct form, acting according to dana, tapaha, and yajna, and nothing more? Is that right action?
So dana, yeah, they're the constituents of right action.
They're constituents, but are they sufficient for right action?
Yeah, but you have service and sacrifice, you have gift, you have you channelize your energies. Yes, it is a picture of right action. But what it's not saying in here, which we're going to discuss in the next 5-6 verses or more, is the different aspects which make up that right action. So this is what you've got to do. This is the method. But how do you know what yajna, what's the quality of the yajna? How do you make that distinction? So in which case you've got to understand the different types of sattvic, rajasic, tamasic intellect. Sattvic, rajasic, tamasic steadfastness, sattvic, rajasic, tamasic happiness. So in understanding that, you get the whole picture of what will enable you to make an informed choice of right action. So this is sort of like what you've got to have in it. You've got to have the idea of yajna. You've got to be serving and sacrificing, as it were, the way you serve. You've got to be putting back into your world. This is like a physical method. You've got to be channelizing your thoughts, your activities. But you could be channelizing your activities with a tamasic intellect, which is in the opposite direction, or a rajasic intellect. Tamasic intellect's not going anywhere. There's no intellect. But you could be channelizing your efforts in a rajasic manner, never getting your desires satiated, but your reasoning is going in the opposite direction of something more universal. It's more self-centered. So you've made choices as such, but you've not actually made choices with the right values in place. So you may have an attitude to serve, but if you're serving with a rajasic intellect, it's limited and it's actually going in the opposite direction. So there's a lot more to the right action than just these are what you've got to do, but on what basis you've got to do these, what's backing it, what are all the elements to make it up, to understand which is the one you choose and which is the one you leave. So as an example, we'll come to it, sattvic happiness is the verses poison in the beginning, nectar in the end. Rajasic happiness, nectar in the beginning, poison in the end. Without going into detail, which we'll come to, we could actually make the decision to do something because it's pleasurable and we get a lot of, it feels good. But then later on down the line, it's actually not in line with where we want to go. So we're serving something in the view of a cause, but in actual fact, it's not really a cause that we're after, and we can't see it. So this gives a bigger perspective of how you are going to make the basis on what you're going to make those choices to pursue yajna, dana, and tapa, which will then give you, if accurately assessed, gives you where you are at in making your decisions, whether they're sattvic, rajasic, or tamasic, and gives you a capacity to evolve from where your tamas is to your rajas, to evolve to sattva, to actually perform actions or make informed decisions in terms of your evolution, one's evolution, right action. Let's go.
नियतस्य तु संन्यासः कर्मणो न उपपद्यते मोहात् तस्य परित्याग तामसः परिकीर्तितः.
Peter, if you could read. Yes.
Yeah. Verse 7. Verily, renunciation of obligatory action is not proper. Tyaga, relinquishment of that from delusion, is declared tamasika.
So the thing to note in terms of one's spiritual evolution is to assess what are your obligations. And there are different types of obligatory duties, niyatam karma and naimitya karma. So occasional, you've got your routine duties and occasional duties, which may be on special occasions or something that you've got to do something particular. So one assesses what one's got to do and moves from that. If one doesn't keep with any obligatory duties, if one doesn't assess that, if that discipline, if one's not in tune with that type of discipline, or doesn't have it even in mind, and just doesn't do anything, it's like giving up. It's like not, the movement's not there with any focus to move on anything. It's tamasic. So when one doesn't even see that there is any obligation for anything, so the mind's just wandering idly, doing X or Y without any focus of what one's supposed to do. There's no feeling of doing anything for anybody or anywhere or any cause. At least with the rajasic, there's some cause, even if it's with self-interest. So here there's no feeling, it's totally deluded, it's totally with interest. So when one drops obligations, the things that they're supposed to do, maybe just in your immediate surrounds, for your family, for your work, for you to just keep in yourself in reasonable nick. When one drops it, it's tamasic. It's dropped out of, it says delusion. It's actually, the mind's played a trick. It's almost a mind governing the show. There's no thinking going on. So the mind is actually not allowing you to pursue anything. So it's almost like a depression, a suppression. Tamasic renunciation. So you give up because you just can't do, instead of thinking what to do. Let's read it.
The second topic, covering verses 7 to 12, describes the three types of tyaga, relinquishment. The distinction is related to the three gunas, qualities. It defines tamasika, rajasika, and sattvic tyaga. Tamasika tyaga is renunciation of obligatory action out of delusion. Every human being is obliged to perform regular routine duties and occasional special duties. You have regular obligations to fulfill. As a citizen of your country, member of your community, head of your family, etc. Also duties called upon by special occasion. Relinquishing these duties and responsibilities is tamasika tyaga. An example of tamasika tyaga is of a lady mistakenly discarding her handbag in the garbage bin. She goes out to dispose garbage, with garbage bag in one hand and her handbag in the other. Instead of the garbage, she throws the handbag into the bin. Such relinquishment arises from ignorance, is considered tamasika.
So the lack of any discipline in any form, any consistency, brings about or just makes available the value which becomes or lack of value, promotes a delusion, a lack of thinking, or what am I trying to say? A lack of need to do anything spirals down into a discomfort or a delusion. So you don't need to do anything. So the discipline keeps, the obligation keeps up the momentum to what you've got to do and the awareness of what ought to be done. So it keeps you moving, keeps your growth. So we might feel that we don't need to do certain things, but it only hits us or bites us later. But the obligation keeps us from moving in the wrong circle even. Just keeps us on our toes. We've got to do this. So it prevents us going into the areas where we need not go. Not adhering to any obligation gives that capacity to spiral down. Giving up things which one ought to do with no awareness, tamasic. So one doesn't gain anything, but has a grand expectation of what one should have. So tamasic renunciation is no renunciation, in fact, it's the opposite. Let's go.
दुःखम् इति एव यत् कर्म कायक्लेशभयात् त्यजेत् सकृत्वा राजसं त्यागं नैव त्यागफलं लभेत्.
Tim, if you could read the verse.
Verse 8. Indeed, he who relinquishes action that is painful from fear of bodily trouble, thus performing Rajasika Tyaga, relinquishment, he does not obtain the fruit of relinquishment.
Okay. So got to observe this in oneself. When you give you might be pursuing something and you give it up because it's troublesome, painful. Actually, you might get a scare that something, an illness or a scare or something. So you give up the things that you're not supposed to do. But either if it's like that, or either if it's in the case of that you give something up because it just becomes too heavy on your head to do. So you just think, forget it, I'm not doing this anymore. It's physically painful. You get fed up, troublesome. It involves your physical exertion. You give it up because it's too much. When one does that, one's denied the fruit of our action. So you give it up. You denied the fruit of action. In true renunciation, you take it up. The fruit of action comes. You gain that peace, happiness, that fulfillment. But your focus is not on the fruit. Whereas here it's on the fruit. You give it up. It's painful. One doesn't achieve it. It's troublesome. You feel it's better not to do it. But there's one problem with this. When one does give something up and it's painful, if the desire is not resolved, the minute it's no longer painful, you'll go back to that desire. So you still have to deal with the desire. Rajasic renunciation. Painful from fear, bodily trouble. Doesn't gain the fruit. So give things up because it becomes too difficult. But it doesn't resolve the desire. This is the issue. So our whole evolution is to fulfill our desire. In this case, it's just an avoidance of fulfilling what one ought to fulfill. It keeps one in a constant agitation. Let's read it.
Rajasika Tyaga is relinquishing action because of fear of bodily pain, kaya klesha bhyaha, or sorrow, dukkha. Giving up action because it is troublesome to the body or mind. The first cause pertains to the physical body. When a person does not want to act out of inertia or finds action tiresome, painful, relinquishes action through unwillingness to exert or suffer physical trouble. Such relinquishment is considered Rajasika Tyaga.
Anybody can think when you give something up when it's troublesome. When does it happen?
A fitness pursuit.
Fitness pursuit. It becomes too difficult. You think, I'm not doing it anymore. All sorts of things like that.
I think probably a big incentive to give something up when it becomes troublesome is when you feel other people aren't really contributing what you expect, or they're not or they're not communicating in the way that you would expect them to.
Mm-hmm.
So that's probably one of the main reasons why I feel like giving something up at a particular time. So yeah, I mean, keeping momentum going in a group, for example. So I suppose a lot of that motivation to give something up is a sort of social one, where we have expectations from other people, and perhaps that goes back to, I mean, that can be seen as an individual issue. I mean, a problem with your own psychology rather than other people. But that's just my experience of when I might feel like giving something up.
So it was quite interesting you say that. That's actually the norm of what the mass does. Rajasic renunciation, give it up when it gets too difficult. It's not, as Peter was saying, an individual thing, it's a norm. This is what it's actually saying. You give it up. So it's actually to assess the scenario when, say, for instance, you have a group, you feel the group is not contributing as you expect. What would make it? What would make it prevent one from giving up in that circumstance? What would be one's? What could be one's view? What would have? How could you manage that?
I suppose if the desire was strong enough, then an individual can just push things through. But in practical terms, I suppose, well, in my experience, communication, even if it's negative communication, leads to better understanding. But I'm not sure if how communication between people is actually related to these specific verses. Mm-hmm. But I do think communication is quite important.
So,
but communication can sometimes be entirely negative. You can get endless criticism of what you're doing is madness, but it's that cussed self-belief that what you're doing is actually right that persists. The geniuses that are said to pursue something regardless of infinite criticism eventually are proven right.
So in the context of the verse, if you have a vision of your evolution, when your focus is fixed on that, irrespective of what the surrounds are doing, your focus is kept on that. But in terms of Rajasic renunciation, as Peter was mentioning, you might feel like giving up. As we all have to work with the world, in our world, we relate to the world, as we can't be devoid and work only as an island, even if we're working with our own genius for our own evolution. Part of that evolution and genius is relating to your world. So you can't ignore it. But it's understanding that when it becomes troublesome or painful, that you keep the vision in mind and understand it's part of the evolution rather than to actually just get the job done. That's the difficult part. No doubt, if nothing is happening, you may be justified if you weigh up all the pros and cons of whether, if you assess it objectively, in relation to your higher cause, whether or not it's to be dropped or taken up, continued with. So definitely, if everybody is contributing to a cause, it builds a momentum. But the world isn't as that And normally, not everybody all of the time is contributing to the cause, which in view one's own purview of expectation, one feels it ought to be. So Rajasic renunciation, when it gets troublesome, you want to give up. But keep your vision in mind of what it is that you're trying to pursue. And the troublesome scenarios will drop away. But keep that vision in mind. The Rajasic person gives it up. Can't blame them. Also, the Rajasic person, when there's no trouble, will also take back up that desire, because the desire is of self-interest or some result orientation. The Sattvic person keeps going. The Rajasic person takes it up when there's no trouble or no pain. It's like when sometimes I'm just mentioning somebody that I know, diabetic. The minute they came to know, they tried to do all these different things to make themselves okay. And the minute they were okay, they went back to the lifestyle which was actually causing them to have the problems. The minute they were told they were okay. So the lack of, when there was the trouble, nearly losing their sight, they felt, I've got to do X, Y, Z to stop this from happening. But the minute it was okay, they went back to their old ways. Rajasic renunciation. We can extend that to the way we relate in terms of the world. The minute it's okay, you start functioning again. But the minute it's troublesome, you drop it. So if you keep a bigger vision and cause of what your evolution is, irrespective if things become difficult, you continue. The Rajasic person gives up because they are after the fruit and they don't feel they're going to get it, which is actually, if you get the fruit in terms of the result, in terms of Rajas, there'll be no peace of mind anyway. That's the thing to note in this. I think Vida's example hits it on the head for what we do all the time, everybody. If we're not getting it catered to, we drop it. The thing is to keep the vision in mind. Difficult part. Things will come into play if you keep the vision in mind. The right persons will come into play if you keep the vision in mind. The momentum will, if you put in the momentum, and it will drop away where it needs to.
I wondered if we could just go back to the topic about that I brought up about communication, and Tim also touched on this, and Tim said that some of the greatest things have come out of people persevering against extensive criticism, but in day-to-day life, but in the sort of more minor problems, mundane problems one comes across, if you're just trying to organize a get-together or something a bit more, less ambitious than I think what Tim was talking about, you're bound to meet Rajasic attitudes and people throughout your day, but at the same time, dealing with sort of emotional disputes is a part of people's lives as well. And I haven't really observed in these verses how one, I could understand in isolation how one could approach this philosophy, but in terms of living in a community where to resolve disputes and to be concerned with other people and how they're feeling, one would have to, and how to empathize, one would have to at least simulate a Vajasic or Tamasic mindset. So perhaps you could talk more about how communication works in social groups, and if this philosophy has the expectation that an individual would have to keep some kind of sattvic purity while still being exposed and understanding more rajasic tendencies.
So irrespective, the understanding is that everybody in your surrounds, in your community, in your family, or in your space, wherever you go, your work, is different, has different motivations to oneself. And when one comes into an environment where there's a common cause or goal, one expects that everybody will feel the same as you do. So you feel that one feels that we're all working to a particular cause, and there's a particular method of how to do it. But unfortunately, it doesn't work like that. So when things are not going according to plan, it's to actually understand, if you are with your own vision or direction or motivation, your own ideals, where you're heading, is to actually understand others are also, the compassion comes in is when you understand others are also with their own emotions, feelings, their own vision, which may partially link with yours, but not totally. It may be 50% in line with your thoughts. So that's where you can communicate. But the other 50% is not in line with your ideals. Maybe the ideal, yes, but not in line with your activities, because we all have different types of vasanas, all different types of vocations. So it's actually understanding that's the case and enabling that space to encourage or let that person come along that path at maybe not the same pace as you want it to be, to actually contribute. But it's an understanding that's where they're at. This is where you're at. The two may not meet, and sometimes they may meet. But from one's perspective, in order to move forward, you've got to keep moving forward with that understanding. And relate, talk, make the effort, communicate, but don't have any expectation with the communication from your side. So if something flourishes, it's a bonus. That's in terms of one's spiritual evolution. Otherwise, one can try, one can communicate, one can say all sorts of things. It doesn't mean it will move anywhere. So it's actually having an understanding of where the other person is at and actually making that communication and giving that time and space. So unfortunately, or fortunately, in fact, in terms of, say you're living in a community, I'm just thinking of when I used to be in an academy or in our surrounds, it's actually understanding where each individual's at. But you keep doing your karma. And by you doing your karma, it sets the example or the it sets the tone that one can see the work being done, so one comes along with it. You can't make anybody do anything. Right? You can actually emphasize and empathize and encourage and have that compassion and inquire and make time frames or do whatever, but you can't have any expectation on that. You can actually ask questions of, is there anything I can do to help in a particular environment, or what, do, but the thing you can do is do your role. If everybody plays their role, there's a momentum and it moves. If everybody doesn't play their role, you keep moving, the right people will come in place for the cause that you're pursuing. So you've got to keep moving. And where it doesn't work, you just understand it and keep moving. So the feeling and the emotion where that comes in is you feel it. You identify that a person may be struggling in a particular area where you're not struggling, or where you might be struggling and somebody offers you help. It may be difficult to take, but you've got to take it. When you've got a bigger picture in mind, you feel more able to do that. When you don't have a bigger picture in mind, you have an expectation and there's only a blame. And it falls apart. It's troublesome and you give it up. But if you've got a real true value, an ideal, a cause, which is in your yajna, tapa, and dana, that to pursue through that evolution of not just you, but the whole. See, community the whole encompasses community, family. Your spiritual evolution has got to encompass everything that you meet. That's what makes it spiritual. Doesn't mean that you've got to be meeting everybody all the time. It's a state of mind. So not to be communicating is not spiritual. Communicating is not necessarily talking all the time. Sometimes it's just that silence. Tim, go ahead.
Just a small example.
Sorry, Tim. Peter, does that? I'm wondering if that is.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful. Yeah.
The very tricky part is understanding that we are all different, and we actually expect. You see, when we meet a cat or a dog, we have perception of what their traits are. But when we meet humans, we also have a perception of what they ought to be. But they aren't as they, because in humans there's cats, dogs, snakes, elephants, giraffes, all sorts. And we have an expectation of thinking they should be a certain way. So we react with our emotions towards them rather than thinking, what is that refinement of emotion which will actually raise it, which will actually help. And one's got to be relatively grounded in one's own vision in order to give that space and allow it to happen, to actually communicate or encourage. Tim, you had something.
I was just going to give a small example of this in communities where right action is understood. You don't need to thank people for doing things because they're doing it for their own right action, but you endlessly engage in thanking people because it's considered rude not to in certain cultures, but you are dissimulating almost in order to engender good communication, even though it's quite irrelevant to thank anyone for what they should be doing for right action for their own self.
So where it's needed, where there's verbal communication needed, communicate. Where it's even though it may not need to be done. Where it's all in the same, where there's an understanding, it may not need to be done because you're communicating by just getting on with it. Yeah, it's assess the scenario, assess the situation. But if you feel you need to do something, do it. Don't leave it to others. Put in your efforts and do it. Don't have any expectation of what happens. But you put in your effort to do what you can. Rome wasn't built in a day. Let's continue next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Tim and Peter, also for the good input. Thanks, Peter.